Back in secondary school for Chinese oral exams, we were given a random picture and we had to describe what's happening in it in Chinese. My description would always be like this. 在图片的下面有一个老阿嬷在跳舞，跳到很开心，跳到她掉她全部的 orange. And as for reading passages, I would heed my Chinese teacher's advice to skip the words that I couldn't read in order to make it sound smooth. And I take this advice literally. 一天，老虎到了一只动物，大吃一餐。这是鸣的动物对老虎说：“我是天上来的，你吃我。” Basically, my mother tongue is trash, and it wasn't the case in the beginning. Back in primary school, I was actually pretty good in Chinese. I would always score A's, and it was one of my more confident subjects. I have this one friend that was pretty bad at Chinese, and would always barely pass or even fail his Chinese exams. Saying this makes me sound like an asshole, but younger me would always look at him and say this in my mind. How can anyone be this bad at Chinese? Pretty sure this was younger me cursing at myself, because in just the next few years while I was in secondary school, it would become one of my worst subjects and the bane of my existence. Having a hardworking desk buddy in school is really important, and I would dare say close to or as important as having a good teacher. My desk buddy would always use Chinese class to play and fool around. Well, I joined him at the back of the class doing just that. I even remembered us kicking a ball around at the back of the class while the teacher was teaching. My Chinese teacher was way too nice. She tried to get us to listen, but due to her non-confrontational personality, she gave in and just let us be. This repeated until our O-levels, and while my friends were crying over a B3 grade for Chinese, I was celebrating joyfully over a C6, which was essentially a borderline pass. After graduating from secondary school and we were given a choice between the polytechnic or junior college path for further studies, one of the biggest reasons I chose polytechnic was not just because I want to be free from the classroom setting for my further education, but also because I don't want to study Chinese anymore. This mentality of mine to constantly avoid Chinese since I've already given into the idea that I'm bad at it followed me into adulthood. Before I started working, I was able to get by life speaking English most of the time, but upon entering the workforce, the majority of my colleagues are in their late 40s and beyond, which is essentially a generation where people were much more fluent in Chinese and the Hokkien dialect compared to those around my age. If there's one thing I've learned on how to connect to someone deeper, is to speak their language. Being so bad at speaking Chinese prevented me from doing that, and I naturally put myself at a distance from them. Furthermore, my work requires me to work with people from China, which made it so much more worse than it already is. Chinese is already so difficult for me, and on top of their accent, they're as good as speaking to a wall when they talk to me. But this didn't just affect me in my workplace, but also in my personal life. A couple of months ago, I was at a gathering with my relatives. I was just sitting on the floor playing with one of my niece with this deck of cards that has a picture of a fruit on the front and the Chinese word of it on the back. I can't remember exactly how we got to that point of the conversation, but I was asked by one of my relatives if I knew what that fruit was called in Chinese. Obviously, I know what it's called in English, but since I didn't know the Chinese word of it, I suddenly found myself being made fun of by not just that one relative, but an onslaught of the whole family tree when she shouted so loudly to the whole dang house that I don't know what it's called in Chinese. I was constantly called jiak gantang, a slang that directly translates to eat potatoes, implying that someone is westernized and completely out of touch with their own cultural roots. Being surrounded by close to 10 people around me making fun of my ineptness in Chinese inevitably triggered a part inside of me that was dying to defend myself. I was glad that I didn't and just laughed with them, because I knew that what they said was true. There was just so many downsides to being bad at your own mother tongue, be it in your workplace, the ability to connect and understand someone better, or giving yourself the chance to immerse in your own cultural roots. I inevitably blamed myself for not studying harder in Chinese when I was in school, but I knew that I shouldn't, because it's always easier to blame myself for something in hindsight. The me in that moment, with the knowledge and experience that I have, thought that that was the best decision and went with it. Of course, I knew that I could have done better now, but what's done was done. I have put in much more effort to acknowledge my shortcomings and tried my best to speak in complete Chinese sentences rather than constantly switching between Chinese and English to cover my gaps. I'm still quite a distance away from being at a standard that I was happy with, but it's okay because I've already broken past the hardest point, which is the acknowledgement that I need to stop eating potatoes.